And welcome back to Lesson 4 of the 3D Rad tutorial series by me, Sorbius. In the last lessons, we learned how to use 3D Rad and what all the menu options mean. We learned how to add and link objects to our project, and we explored the toolbox to give you an understanding of the different objects you can use in the game. In this lesson, we are going to talk about custom content because the game does come, or the program does come with some assets that you can use. But if you want to break free and really make your own game, you need to have your own custom content. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the different kinds of assets that you can add. Now, in the object menu, which you use to add or use Control-A. Shortcuts are your friend. You got these three options we talked about in the first lesson, and that's install custom skin mesh, install custom rigid body box sphere group, and install custom rigid body polygons. These three are how you add or give yourself the ability to add custom content. And the reason I say that is because when I go to Object, Add, and I go to, well, let me give you a scene here. We'll add the terrain, and then we'll add the car, and then we'll add a G-force, and we'll link the car to the terrain and the G-force. The G-force doesn't need to be linked to the terrain. We'll move the car up, press the space, and away we go. Okay, it's a little choppy because I have something wrong with my graphics card. Anyway, all right, and just for fun, let's add a skybox. There we are. And let's add a rigid body. And let's add a skin mesh. Okay. The rigid body I'm going to put like over here. Some such. If you want the rigid body to collide with the terrain, the car, and reactive physics, we're going to have to link it to the G-force, the car, and the terrain. And the skin mesh, which by default is represented as this little fish looking thing. This is just a default placeholder for your graphics. This is what you're going to replace. Same thing you can do with the rigid body. So what I'm going to do is make this fish, because right now this doesn't do anything. It's just a visual representation of the object. So what I'm going to do is attach the skin mesh to the rigid body, and I'm going to select the rigid body, and I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to click the box that says display geometry, so that I don't actually see it when it's in the simulation. So now it's invisible, but what I am going to do is I'm going to use my move object to cursor with the rigid body selected, because I want to move the skin mesh to the rigid body. So we're going to click that, and now the fish is there. And the other thing I'm going to do, I'll select the car so the cursor is there. I'm going to add a camera to the scene. This is something you might have wanted to know a few lessons ago, but I'm going to add the cam chase object, and there it is. And the cam chase is a graphical representation of the camera here with the eye facing forward. It's just to show you which direction it's facing, but that doesn't technically matter in some cases. And now I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to hold the middle mouse button on this translation so that it moves along the axis it's aligned. You see, if I don't do that, it'll move toward whatever direction the camera is facing, but if I use the middle mouse button, it'll move in relation to where these cursor axes are pointing. Okay, so with that camera, I'm going to link that to the car because that's what I want to look at. And in the options for the cam chase, down at the bottom is the relationships. When you link an object, you see it appears here, and it's already set to chase. There's a few others like avoid, ignore, render, target, look at. We're just going to leave it as chase. I'm also going to change this translation speed to 1 because that way it'll stick to the camera. This translation speed is kind of like, you could think of it as a drag feature on the camera between 0 and 1. So the higher the number, the less drag there is. Okay, so now when I hit the space bar, you're going to see that the camera is behind the car and I can drive around. And also that fish object is linked to that, the skin mesh rather is linked to the rigid body, so it's I can kind of push it around. Man, I don't know why that's so choppy, but you get the idea. Alright, now it looks like it's kind of floating. You can see from the shadow it's kind of not quite right. That's just because you can change the size of the skin mesh. Okay, and I'm not really going through a tutorial of how to design stuff like this, but if you're getting this, good. When I click the rigid body in the properties, it says I hit display geometry, and then you can see it's much bigger. So the skin mesh, you'll notice when you select a skin mesh, you get 3 more options along the side here, which is the scaling options. Okay, so what I want to do is make this thing bigger. Okay, and as you can see, when I click and drag my mouse, I can change the size. I can do a uniform scale, but I'm just going to do this real quick and dirty for the purposes of this tutorial, and just try to make the fish about the same shape as the rock. That way, it will it'll look better when you're doing it. So now we try that. There you go. There's a big fish object. Oh, and the other thing I forgot is a rigid body. We want to hide that geometry so you can't see it. Okay, so now I got the car. I'm driving around, and when I drive up to the fish, because the rigid body is linked, boop, I can push it around. Very fun. I've already got a game. If I just made a region that said you have to push this into a certain region, and you get a point, 10 points wins. You know, it really is that simple. Okay. So that's the setup for this. Now, the way that you actually create the custom content is if I go to this skin mesh object and I open up the properties, you see it shows you a picture of the skin mesh that you'll be using. This is actually an image that is a representation of it. If you made your own custom content, there wouldn't be any picture here. It would just be a generic image that says user-generated content, and you'll see that in a minute. You actually have to make your own image for this if you want it to show up like that, but it's not a huge deal. And I know there looks like a lot of stuff here, but this is broken down really nicely so that it's easy to understand. But what we want to focus on right now is this change button. When I click the change button, a window appears, and it basically allows me to change this to a number of different types of skin mesh objects that I have available, and these are representative of basically what has already come with the project. Okay, so if I'm going to choose the car, and I'm going to go to add a skin mesh here, and this skin mesh is also as you can see, it's another fish object, and when I press enter I get the properties and I click change. I'm going to change this to the buggy car funny body. Okay, when I click open, you see now it's changed it to the that object. When I click OK, you notice that it has put the skin mesh. This was designed for this car object. That's why it fits so well. And in the car properties, select the car, press enter. I'm going to click the hide car body geometry. That way we don't see it, just like hiding the rigid body. Okay, so now I've added the custom skin mesh to the project. Okay, oops, see that, how the wheels drop down? That's because I didn't link it. So we'll link the car to that skin mesh, and now they will travel together. So now I've got this custom body here, and I can push this rigid body around, and it's just a heck of fun. But that's how you add the custom content. All you have to do is go into the properties of the skin mesh, and you can do this with rigid body too, but the skin mesh, you go into the properties, you just click change, and you select whichever one you want. If I did the same thing for the wheel here, let's see here, I'm going to add another skin mesh, okay, and I'm going to position this one just over here and move it up a little bit. And I'm pretty sure I can select the wheel, but I'm going to do this again quick and dirty. Open the properties, click change, and here's a sports car wheel that comes with the program. So open that, very nice, and there it is. But of course it's not quite the right size, so I'm just going to move this up and back a little bit so that it fits a little. Now I'm going to, it says if I hold a control with a key press it'll uniform scale, so I'm going to hold the control key and uniformly scale this so that it's just beyond the size of the wheel there. Okay, and I'll move it up a little so that it's centered as best I can. Okay, now we're going to link that to the car, and I'm going to go to the car and I'm going to hide the wheels. Well, no, I won't hide the wheels just yet, but I'm going to do that. Okay, so now when I drive around, you see the wheel or the tire is part of that wheel object. It's not spinning because we have to do a few other things, but again, I'm showing you how to add your custom content to the project. So that's how this works. Now, if you want to add your own custom content, because in this tutorial I'm not going to go over how to actually create it in an external program, but if you wanted to make your own car body or rigid body skin mesh or whatever, you just go to Object and you do Install Custom Skin Mesh. And when you click this, it's going to bring up the same dialog box in the index for the skin meshes, and down here it's going to ask you for a file name. So you can type in whatever you want here. Let's say I want custom wheel. Okay, when I click save, this box comes up and said installation complete. Click the change button on the property dialog of the skin meshed object in your project to access the new item. The skin mesh is currently using the default artwork. Please see the 3-red documentation for information on how to replace default files with your own. I'm going to show you how to do that in a way in a later tutorial. But now, I click OK. Now, when I go to the skin mesh for, say, this wheel object, and I press enter and click change, okay, here's that object we just created called the custom wheel. Okay, when I click open, you see it says user made skin mesh. You'd actually have to design a graphic for that if you wanted it to show up. Now it also said in that box that it's using the default graphics. So when I click OK, it shows this purple fish object, and that's just to show you that it is a default graphic, but it's purple instead of yellow, so that you know that it is actually a custom one that you installed yourself. Alright, so that's how we make custom content for our projects. And the same rules apply for the custom rigid body, whether it's a box sphere group for physics or rigid body polygons for static geometry. When you click this, it asks you for a file name. You say custom terrain. I'm sorry, that would be for static. We want this to be dynamic. A custom wheel, let's say whatever, it doesn't matter. Click save, and it says installation complete. Click the change button, it says the same thing, default artwork. So that's how you add custom content, and that's how you get it to apply in your project. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to generate your own custom content in a 3D modeling program. This is going to be a generic tutorial because there's lots of different ways you can do this, and there has to be many ways to export. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson.